Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Naturally High. I am just thrilled to have Daniela Tilbrook back, author of Not My Shame. And we interviewed Daniela some time ago, and it was a very powerful interview. So I really encourage you to check that out. And before we dive into our juicy subject today, which is ayahuasca as remembering, not escaping, we're going to have a juicy talk about plant medicine because Daniela is someone who has subscribed to it. And we want to share her experience and educate people on her experience, as well as maybe some misconceptions around the idea, because I think there's many. If that carries stigma, like addiction carries stigma, I think there's many we're going to be able to discuss. But before we do, I want to introduce Daniela as the author of Not My Shame, but she's also writing a new book. And I just want to share a little bit about that before we dive into our other juicy subject. So Daniela, welcome to Naturally High. Thank you again for being here today. And why don't you tell people where you are right now compared to when we recorded last, which was, let's say, 6 months arbitrarily, just to give a good timeline. What's changed in your life? Maybe you could share with us.
Really good to see you again. And yeah, thanks for having me back on your podcast. So what's changed? I've gone to the Netherlands twice now to do ayahuasca. When I'd sort of spoken to you before, it'd only been that one time, but I did go back in December. And I am writing my second book, which is called Post-Traumatic Wisdom: From Disorder to Inner Peace.
Wow. And, let's just celebrate that for a minute. Hold on. Post-traumatic wisdom. That is what we all want from our adversity, our growth, and our pain, is to come out all the more wiser, the more whole. And I say integrated as well. And I know you're a big subscriber of that as well. But that's something amazing. So when can we expect to see that?
Well, I decided to publish it a year after the first book. So it will come out on the 27th of June in 2026, which is PTSD Awareness Day. So I thought that I would follow up with my second book a year later. And interestingly, my second book has been easier to write in the sense of I'm not trying to figure out how to write a book. So that has made it a lot easier. And for any budding authors out there, just have a really detailed outline. It saves you so much time, because in my first book, it was a little bit loose and I was kind of figuring it out. And sometimes I ended up writing a little bit in circles and then changing things. But this time I really took the time at the beginning to have a clear map. So when you have that map, I mean, it might potentially change a little bit, but I feel much clearer on where I'm going with this book.
Beautiful. There's nothing like experience, right? And that's, you created momentum by doing something consistent every day, because it doesn't get done if you just do it when you feel like it, that's for sure. And here you are, right? Doing it again and again and again and again. So there you go. You inspire me. I'm going to write that damn book. I've always been talking about it, but I haven't yet done it. So there you go.
I always say to people, which I learned, was you just have to have a deadline. So, I've got the publication deadline. I've worked backwards. I'm writing a chapter a week. I'm working with my editor from the beginning. So I've sent her the first 3 chapters, which she's gone through. So we're going to kind of do it in chunks. And I'm even thinking of potentially just sending little chunks of chapters to the beta readers. So it's not so overwhelming when you get the kind of there's a final manuscript for you to read. But
no, I think that's a brilliant idea. You're learning and you're growing as you go along.
Yeah. And the other thing is really to also do it when you don't feel like it. And sometimes
you're building that muscle. It's good. I'm very proud of you. So I want to talk to you a little bit about plant medicine. You have particular experience with ayahuasca. I know that you travel a lot in your personal growth and self-development, and you're someone who is committed to your own personal healing and growth. So I know that much about you. So I want to disclose that to people who are listening today. This isn't someone who, doesn't have any introspection about themselves. You do have that. You're sober, you're clear, you're conscious, you're embodied. Maybe what you could do is share with people why this appealed to you as part of your healing journey and what it is that you found. Maybe let's just start there.
I have had friends that have done plant medicines and they've said, really great stuff about it, how it's helped them. But I was really reluctant. And I think the word kind of psychedelics, and I thought, well, I've spent a long time getting away from those, drinking and, smoking cannabis and all the other things that I felt like I have a really sober life. Like, why would I then go and take psychedelics? But what kind of switched for me is thinking of it as medicine rather than kind of getting off your head. And the intention was so different. It was for healing. And I think once I got my head around that, I thought, actually, I think this might be the next step in my journey. Because until, that point, I'd done lots of different therapies. Before the ayahuasca, I had done EMDR, which was really helpful. And it just felt like almost the next kind of stepping stone in my journey. The reason I went to the Netherlands was because they'd been doing it there a long time. And I kind of thought, it's not legal here either. And it's kind of, where do I go? I kind of wanted to go somewhere safe. So I ended up going to the Netherlands.
Beautiful. So I know that you've done it recently and you've done it at different stages in your journey. Is that correct?
Strangely, actually, it was the same weekend in December last year as the previous year. It just happened to be a year later. And my friend who was also my book coach, he said to me, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing ayahuasca." And then I said, "Oh, would you mind if I went with you?" And yeah, he was fine with that. And it was quite nice to actually go with someone as well, because the first time I did it as a solo person with, strangers, but it was nice to have like someone I knew there with me as well.
So tell me what you found in this process that you had an intention. Do you mind sharing your intention, what it was for people, or just you can give an example of why someone might do that?
They always say that it never gives you what you think it's going to give you. I thought that, like, I don't know, I had this thought that I was going to be shown like why all this happened to me and I'd get this kind of insight, but I
So
wasn't
you
shown
went
any.
looking for answers, clearly, right?
I guess
Okay.
there's always been that question, like, why did this have to happen to me? And, it's something that has haunted me for a really long time, that like, why?
Why me?
Yeah, why me? I didn't really get the answer to that, but I did get other answers.
So you didn't get the answer to what you wanted, but answers were revealed to you about things that you've thought about over the years, over time, or you had clarity about a situation that maybe you saw differently. Is that what you're saying? I'm just trying to help people understand.
So at the first time I went, there was this real strong message, like, you have to forgive, like, you have to let this go, because I've been holding on to it like so strongly. And it showed me all the people I had to forgive. And it kind of went almost like this like ladder of forgiveness, which started like with my stepfather. He was the person that had to forgive the most, and then to my biological father, and then my mother. And then it kind of went down in these layers where the kind of smaller kind of maybe betrayals you've had in your life. And it kind of started going circling through all these people, and that real message of like, you must let this go, like, for your own sake, because you're holding on to this kind of so tightly.
I agree with you. And, holding on to the pain, whatever that is for any one of us, because if you're human, you can't escape it, is part of the story that keeps us stuck. So there's a narrative like this happened to me. I can never be anything different, right? Let's use that as a global example. And therefore, as much as I want to get rid of this, there's an old saying, sometimes the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? That's why people stay in relationships, overstay in relationships, in workplaces, or whatever it may be, or in love with their substances, whatever their addictions are, because there's many in life. Some are definitely more benign than overt, but I think that is the challenge. Is I don't want to use the word surrendering, but in a sense it is. It's an acceptance of what is, right, in order to lighten you up so that you can then be free to do whatever you need to do and come back to the essence of yourself. So, why do you think forgiveness is maybe so challenging for people?
I think when someone's hurt you so much and when it's had such a profound impact on your life, it is hard to let it go, because all the issues that I've had in my adulthood. So it wasn't just what happened to me as a child. It was going into adulthood with like extremely low self-worth and low self-esteem and low confidence. And then it felt like that I was taken advantage in my sort of young adulthood by all the bullies and the bad boyfriends. And it just kind of went on. And it, you know, with my mental health and the complex PTSD, it was just a cascade of just so much stuff and mental health issues because of what someone had kind of done to you. That's why it's so hard to let it go, because it's had such a profound impact on my life.
And your identity is unfortunately tied up in that too. So it's like, who am I, right? You wonder who you really are if you have no sort of grounded anchor, whether it's positive or negative, right? And that's part of the adaptation process, right? Like who you described is so different than the woman I know. How you go about your day, how your commitment to your family, your commitment to your own personal growth and self-development, and on and go. An author, like, holy cow. Like we, it's amazing. So we get kind of caught up in identifying with this perceived identity, which is not true. And unless we are able to see ourselves differently, even if we get a glimpse or someone can hold a mirror up to us to show us that's not the person I see here, we can be there, unfortunately, for a very long time.
I think also the inner critic is just so loud when you've been through these kind of traumas, and it's kind of trying to sort of, dial down that voice. And I love what you've just reflected back to me, and I sort of forget, oh yes, no, I am an author, and it's almost like you don't see it yourself and like all that journey that you've been on, but it's nice when someone kind of reflects it back and you think, wow, actually I have come a really long way.
Because I don't see the narrative. I happen to know you, but let's just assume I don't, because I see this with new clients all the time. I see the essence of who they really are. I see, so the essence is their potential. It represents their being, where the person who's sitting in the chair, let's just say it's you for this example, the old you had all this noise filling your head. That wasn't who you were. It was just your noise and through your lived experience, unfortunately. So it's just interesting how we can evolve and how we can let go of these stories, rewire our neural pathways, and start to move beyond the narrative, which is the goal.
And
one of many.
And I think with what I really took advantage of, that you talk about the rewiring with the ayahuasca, because after the first ceremony, when I came back to the UK, I kind of had a real thought about like, this is the kind of person I want to be. I want to be the kind of person that can sit down and write and do deep work and be disciplined. And I was able to install those habits where at the end of the ceremony, I kind of mentioned my book, and one of the guides said to me, oh, when are you releasing the book? And I just looked on ChatGPT and I asked the question, when would be a good date to release my book? And a date came out in April, and I was thinking, oh, that's a bit too soon. And there was like the June date of the PTSD Awareness Day. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a really great day. And it also gave me like 6 solid months. And then I sort of set the deadline, and I came back and then just executed. But I think the whole ceremony also just helped me with like creating those new habits, which was fantastic.
It's just amazing. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the integration of the healing journey. And the integration, just for people who are listening, can happen without psychedelics. It can happen with psychedelics and without psychedelics. So I want to hear from you your feelings around how the integration really helped you and what exactly it was for you.
I think sometimes it is the mundane, I don't know, everyday life when you can have these kind of peak experiences. And you are correct, you don't need to do psychedelics to integrate. But just to, if I quickly tell you what happened in the second ceremony, I think it will give a little bit of context to, and this was almost like a deeper level of forgiveness, because the second time I went, it was like in the ceremony, I was like this light, this like loving mother energy. And I saw my stepfather as a child, probably about 7 or 8. And I said to him, like, well, what did they do to you? And in this vision, I saw him kind of being abused. But what was really interesting is like, in that moment, I had such compassion for that boy. And I think it just gave me that feeling of like, I think it's when the traumatized end up traumatizing others. And this is not to excuse, obviously, like what he did.
I understand what you're saying.
But it gave me that different, like almost a higher perspective that he's probably been through, some sort of hell himself that has made him kind of, do what he did. And it was that interesting, almost that deeper kind of level of like, again, like just kind of forgiving and just sort of getting on with my own life and not just holding on to this like so deeply.
In order to be able to forgive, even if it's in a split moment of clarity and a flash, or you in under a psychedelic experience, ayahuasca, recognizing that you saw yourself, recognizing that this is someone who's been pained or troubled or abused himself in order to be able to be that horrible with others. You got that. That's part of the healing, right? To be able to even see it, even if or witness it, because that witnessing is part of it. And we know that people don't have to remember everything. They have to be validated emotionally for what they've experienced. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Doing it in a group, I think also that's where the power of the healing is as well, because, it was very well done. There was a lot of, that first evening we did breath work. There was a lot of sharing. And I think it's other people kind of witnessing your healing journey as well, which can be so healing.
So that is the power of group work. Is
Yeah.
that there by the grace of God go I see myself in you, you see yourself in me, right? Where if we're sitting in a room one to one, I think you can hide a lot easier than in a group.
And I think, Jeanne, also what was interesting, if I was having therapy and we're talking about forgiveness, I guess it was more of a visceral, I just kind of felt, it was more of a feeling of compassion, which sounds really strange, like compassion towards your abuser, which it kind of, I don't know, because in that moment, I was this loving light, I wasn't me. Well, I suppose it's part of me.
You really are. Yeah, it is part of you, but let's not go too far there. Um, give yourself some grace, girl.
I went to an integration circle on Sunday with the British Psychedelics Society.
So what is that? Can you explain that?
So it's a group here in the UK, and every 6 weeks or so they have like integration circles where people can come and talk if they've had an experience. But it was really nice to kind of just kind of tell people about my experience. And what was really interesting is that I feel like I've got more peace with my past, but as I've come back, the other problems of life or the other issues have become a little bit more like the mundane everyday. So it was quite interesting about that. It's not a silver bullet. Like you can find this kind of inner peace with your past and forgiveness, but like life still goes on and you still
Life
have
is lifing, that's what it does, right? It gives us some entertainment. It keeps us on our toes.
like last year I had it was my 50th, so I had a big 50th party.
Wow.
And there was a little bit of slight overspending last year and then Christmas. And then it was interesting because at the beginning of the year, it was like, right, we need to sort of look at our finances and sort that out a little bit. But it was that real bang back to earth. And like, this is the reality of life. Like you feel like you found this inner peace, but like, we're going to give you the next thing.
Yeah, you're this worldwide author. You're traveling around the world doing ayahuasca, like it's all good, right? As we say, we're never exonerated, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes, and if there is a part of me that almost feels like, oh, I've done so much inner work, I've done the therapies, I've done the plant medicines, I should have arrived by now. But realizing that it's not that destination, it's it's that continued journey.
I think it's like digging into China. Like when we talk about peeling back the onion, there's another layer and another layer and another layer. So, if I think about how many you're talking about healing, like you're never there yet. We're never exonerated. And I always say it to me, I'm also surprised. I go, it's when I have a moment of clarity or consciousness around something that I haven't seen before, which I've had in the last couple of weeks because I've been away. And traveling and stepping back a little bit more from work than in a way that I've never have, it brings up space and it brings up clarity. But I sometimes think to myself, how did you not know that? Like, how did you not know that, right? Because you see something in such a different way than what you thought about it before. And so, yes, we are never, ever, ever there yet. And I think if we can make friends with that and just be grateful and in gratitude for this continuous wonder about life and ourselves and our relationships and each other, I think that really is the secret sauce. Otherwise, we get bored. And when we get bored, we get restless. And people aren't their best when they're restless, no question. So, can you speak to that a little bit?
For some reason, I was quite scared of doing like the mushrooms. I don't know why I felt okay doing ayahuasca. But yeah, it's just I was sort of a little bit scared of the mushrooms. So I mean, I've never done them personally, but it is interesting about the peeling of the layers, because sometimes I realize that I still internalize so much, almost like taking on the responsibility of like other people. Or I don't know, if a friend hasn't been in contact for a while, and I don't know. It's almost like, oh, what have I done? So I've sort of, sometimes I'm still kind of doing it in like little scenarios in my life where I have to kind of just step back, and, people are really busy, and, life's quite complex. There's there's a lot going on in other people's lives, that it's not really often not about you as well.
Ah, that's what I call emotional sobriety, is when you recognize that emotionally what's going on in other people's landscapes may have very little to do with you. But how do we not lose ourselves? And I mean, abandon ourselves in those difficult times when we're triggered as, from other people, because they're in their stuff, they're in their own internal mess. How do we hang on to ourselves in those challenging moments? Because people get triggered.
Yeah, and I think also when you've had a lot of attachment wounds, you're quite susceptible to that kind of,
Absolutely. I know that firsthand.
but it's kind of, again, just building that real kind of solid, sense of self, because, if you are a secure person, you're less affected by kind of other people's behavior, and you don't have the full picture anyway. You don't, there's so much of the unknown in other people's lives, unless they're telling you.
And our own. There's so much of our know. We think we know, right? Because we're only in this, what I call chapter of life. In this moment in time, this is the chapter of life we're both in. So, whatever it is that we see from that perspective. We haven't learned the next thing yet. We're waiting to become more conscious of that. And when we do, then we arrive again, right? So, it's an interesting concept to recognize that this is a continual evolution. Please God, it will stay that way until we no longer are here on this planet. But that's what I believe self-actualization is really about, is that there's this hunger and this desire and this thirst to grow and evolve. And in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of the last things that we actually achieve. So it's not one of the first things. And some people say, well, I'm not really like that. And maybe you think you're not really like that. By neurologically, biologically, we're wired to evolve, because as a species, we are more alike than different. Like, yes, you may look different than me, you may live in a different country, but as humans, we have tendencies that are typical.
I've noticed whenever I am in these kind of circles, when people are sharing, you can often really relate to their stories. You might not have had, it's obviously not going to be exactly the same, but it is that kind of common humanity, and, that we are more similar than that we are different.
That's one of the things that we talk about, is there, by the grace of God, go I. Like, I know that you're as vulnerable as I am. So when something happens, good or bad, we identify because we know that we've been spared or chosen in that moment. Maybe it's just that moment, because life does life, right? The way it unfolds for us. Is there something that you see as trends or patterns in the psychedelic landscape that you want to share or talk about?
I've sort of gone twice myself. I mean, I wouldn't sort of call myself like an expert really, but I
No,
guess there's more openness for people to go down these kind of routes. I mean, I wouldn't really be able to speak to trends per se.
that's okay. But you talk about it being illegal in England. right? But yet there's integration circles for people who go there. And I know the technicality around that. So I'm just saying, like, in medicine in Canada, it's started to become like, obviously there's practitioner training, there's certifications, there's all sorts of different trainings for it. So, and there's research and clinical studies done around the world. So it's starting to become more, I think the stigma around it, just like there's stigma around cannabis and stigma around alcohol, I think it's starting to loosen as well, because it has been benefit, especially with studies in PTSD. People who have served in the military have had very good success with it. So, do you think there's a need for education? Like, so let's say I'm the layperson who's living wherever I am in the world, and I think that this could be a really good idea to explore. Who do you go to? How do you find out the information if it's in an underground tunnel right now?
Yeah,
Because is word of mouth, right?
yeah.
Typically.
I think that's because when I went to the first integration circle, because they're not allowed to kind of tell you where to go. So what then what happens is you talk to people after the circle, and this lady said, "Oh, I went to this place in the Netherlands," and she shared the website with me. So it is a little bit like that, kind of trying to find the sort of, I suppose, people that have been to the places. And I think especially with something like psychedelics, you don't want to go to some like I can't think of like a witch doctor type person, doesn't really know what they're doing.
You know, someone who's trained and experienced, not just in psychedelics, but also in trauma and who has some clinical capacity to help someone, right? Are you finding that exists now, like a very good hybrid of psychedelics with best medical or clinical practices?
Well, the place I went to, so I went to two different places. This last December, the lady had trained as a doctor, and she kind of had that medical background, and then sort of went, didn't necessarily agree with all the kind of Western models. It kind of went more towards the kind of plant medicine. The group and the facilitators, they were so like heart centered, and just it was all done in such a great structured way that I mean, I couldn't fault them. And I just felt so looked after. And something did happen in the ceremony. I was crying, and the lady, she had this like real mother kind of energy around her. And she just kind of held me whilst I was sobbing. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I was never held as a child. And I told her that as well. I said, oh, I think, yeah, I was never soothed. And it just felt so nice. I was like, wow.
Well, I understand the impact of someone holding space for you, safe space for you, because that was in my somatic training back in decades ago. And here are total strangers, for want of a better expression, right? Treating you like your family was supposed to have treated us, right? Like holding you in your arms like a baby, making you feel safe until they can release, knowing that you feel safe and supported. And I thought to myself, what a miracle that this stranger can do that for me. And it's kind of hard to trust in the beginning. It was for me in particular, because if you don't have the capacity to be needed or allow yourself to be supported, then you don't have the capacity. It's a learned skill, right? Just like we learn everything else. That's why it's so easy for us healers who really haven't fully healed to give out rather than to take in. Can we fill up our own cup? Do we have more capacity for ourselves? Right. And that's a learned skill. Did you find that a little bit of a stretch, or you were just, the substance allowed you to get there much quicker? Because I
I
think
think
I've done that without it. Right. So it just took a bit of a beat.
Yeah, it did. It did feel like I could really let go. And what was interesting, because I was kind of sobbing and then it kind of slowed down. I guess as it naturally would if someone's kind of consoling you. But I just remember thinking, oh, this is so nice. And
Oh,
it was really beautiful. And another interesting thing happened, because I was joking with my friend how I was kind of plotting, I'd get
yep.
my 3 cups of ayahuasca. What was super interesting was I just didn't need it because in the first ceremony, when I first went, I did have the 3 cups, but this time it was a much more mellow experience that I didn't need to get off my head, or it was almost like trying to get as much. I think it's that addicted part of me, and it was quite a lesson to actually just take what you need. You don't need to like get off your head here. As I said, like much more mellow, much more, relaxing.
Well, that shows how much you've changed because it may seem subtle that you felt that you didn't need as much. And somebody could say, whoa, it's like being hungry. She wasn't as hungry.
Yeah.
But we're not talking that. We're talking about an innate drive that makes you feel like your survival depends on it. Because when we're in an addictive state, our survival feels like it depends on it. It's not that that really is life threatening, but the urgency around acting on something, whether it's my 3 cups of ayahuasca or eating that chocolate cake or whatever it may be, there's this urgency that feels like it just won't quit. And so for you to have that realization that, oh my God, that maybe I'll just drink because there's enough here and I'll see if I need more. And if I need more, I do. And if I don't, that's a
Yeah.
major shift.
It was massive. And I remember the guide coming around saying, "Do you want another cup?" And I was like, "No, thank you."
So yeah, just because it's there, I'm going to eat it and it's free, right? It has a lot of mentality. How many people
Yeah.
overeat because it's a free buffet? Go for it, right? Before you learn that you don't need everything on the buffet. You pick what you want, right? What's important to you, right?
I think it's that also, oh, get your money's worth, that kind of, but yeah, it was a real interesting lesson. And the other one was because I had to come off the caffeine a week before and I was getting like really bad headaches, like muscle aches. And it was interesting because after the first ceremony, as soon as they dropped me back to the station, the first thing I did was get a coffee. But this time I kind of thought, actually, just chill on the caffeine as well. So like now, actually wait till later in the day to have a coffee rather than having it kind of first thing to get me started.
Me too. I learned that you're not supposed to have it first thing. You're
Yeah.
supposed to have it at least an hour after you wake up. So that's good. I have this love-hate thing about coffee. Either I'm into it too much or I go off and then eventually it land back in the same place. It's an addictive substance. There's no question. No question. So when you think back of where you were last year, where you were post integration of a psychedelic trip, what do you think is noticeably different in your life or about yourself?
Something quite major happened as well, because in December, I was talking to one of the guides before. We were talking about my mum, and I was sort of saying, she has to step on the bridge, like she has to make the first move. We haven't spoken for 2 years. And then after the experience, we're all having dinner. And I said, "Oh, I've decided I'm going to go and see my mum the day after Christmas." My brother was over. And the original plan was that he was going to pick up my children and then take them to my mum's, and I was going to have nothing to do with it. But it was an interesting one. So the day after Christmas, I was kind of going, am I really going to go to my mum's just because I've been shown this in the experience? I kind of thought, okay, let's go with it. Let's see what Mother Aya, let's see, let's trust her wisdom, I guess. But it was really nice, and we had a lovely family day. And I've seen my mum a few times now since. But what's interesting was, if I was going to see her, I just had to let go of what I wanted her to say to me, or that she had to apologize, or that she had to have this remorse, or I don't know. It was a real interesting one to kind of just accept her for like all the flaws and, who she is. So that's been quite interesting.
That is interesting. And I didn't have the same experience as you, but what I can say with a parent that could be disappointing for us is that the faster we recognize that their capacity to be any different is extremely limited, if not at all, the more peace we will have. And you came to that, which is an amazing place to land, because then you just release all the expectations and you can be in the moment of the relationship rather than in the past or in the future wishing it was different, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. You've just completely hit the nail on the head with what you said. And it was, she just doesn't have the capacity. And I think just either deciding, are you going to see her? If you do want to see her, you're just going to have to accept, just completely accept her for who she is. And it was interesting because I left that day, I actually left my headphones at my mum's. So I had to go back a few days later to pick them.
Interesting. Divine intervention.
And then it was quite, we just watched a film together. We didn't talk about anything like deep, but it just kind of...
You got to put your toe in the water first before you enter the pond, right?
This is true. But just that little bit of normality, just kind of watching a film together. And then she put a blanket on me because I was a bit cold. So, it was nice.
Oh, that's sweet. No expectations other than being in the moment, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is just the moment. It fell into our lap. We're going to take care of it right now. We're going to be in it.
And I guess we'll never really know, we'll never know what they all went through. And this isn't, I'm not excusing, but we don't know what kind of traumas they've had. They wouldn't have had any of the interventions that we have these days. There wasn't really any therapy. You just kind of got on with life. And I don't know, maybe there's that compassion for their unhealed stuff as well.
Well, that I think is the self-actualized healer. Personally, I've experienced it, and I don't think many people still understand it, that as you evolve and grow and heal, you can hold space for your pain and still have compassion for someone who really didn't know better or could do better. Right? Because it's not that there's this old, I guess, belief or narrative that if you forgive, you're accepting what is happening as being okay, which is not what we're saying. They're not the same thing. I talk about this often, but I give you another example. When my mother was dying, I remember feeling incredibly happy and incredibly sad at the same time. Happy for who I was and how I was showing up in my life, especially to her because it was challenging for me, but sad because I was losing my mother. And I knew, and I was really astonished, like how you can hold space for two things at the same time. It was really I was like, get my head around it. But if we can, it's not an either or. I think we've been bought into the narrative. If you think like this and you can't have that. And what about holding space for and? I can be happy and I can feel sad.
Yeah.
I can forgive and I can still hold space for me.
I think that's so important. And it's taken me a really long time to get to that point.
Oh, well, for sure. It's hard work. As you know, it's about being in your own integrity in every aspect of your world, of your life, with yourself before others, because we can fool others, especially if we're skilled in, addiction. We learn how to lie, to manipulate, to coerce, we're really skilled at that. But pulling one over yourself is a whole different ball game, right? So, you can't fool yourself. You got to live with yourself, unfortunately. So
I know.
So talk to me a little bit about your new book. You're very high level. You're not talking to me, actually. You're talking to other people, the listeners. What can they expect from you? Because maybe just give them a hybrid of what Not My Shame is if someone's new to you or they're not familiar and where you're going with it.
So Not My Shame was the first half of the book was called The Dark, and it was my own personal story. And the second half of the book was called The Light. And it talked a little bit about all the different healing modalities that I kind of went through. So like a bit of a guide for people. This second book is slightly different, and it's a bit less of my own personal story because I work with survivors. I coach survivors as well. So it's kind of maybe a little bit more universal in the sense that it's not just my story. And just looking at the kind of the wisdom that we kind of gain through this process. And it is that journey to kind of inner peace. There's some days I feel like, I've got more inner peace than others, but it's definitely that process towards the inner peace, the kind of forgiveness, the letting go. Yeah, from disorder to inner peace was the subtitle, or is the subtitle.
Beautiful. So the first one is more a hybrid of your story and resources. And the second one is more universal to people who have been on a self-development journey and just moving beyond their trauma and their grief.
Yeah, and there's a chapter, about why me, why is it so hard to let it go? I mean, we talked about internalization earlier on the call of like why we internalize.
Mhm.
There's a lot of like nervous system kind of practices and just finding that space between, the stimulus and the response when you take the breath that you don't automatically react and to pause and that kind of sacred pause where you can choose your response, which is really, important as well. I guess all the little nuggets of wisdom that I've kind of found throughout this journey.
It's beautiful that you put it into a guide like that. I think it's handy and I think it's necessary because we don't know. Some of this sounds so fundamental, like that pause between, stimulus and response. But that is the difference between your life being completely different or not. But people don't recognize, like, when we're talking, it sounds so generic. Like it sounds like, okay, just breathe, right? Breathe, 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 right? We know that, but we're not good at doing things that we know. So there's a difference, right? So I think it's the same thing with that. When you talked about that sacred pause and going, hmm, we've all been there where we've just kind of overridden it, So learning to get comfortable with that, the more times you do that, the more you're rewiring your neural pathways, which means then you actually are creating a new habit that sticks.
And I think sometimes if you just automatically respond and then, you just escalate any little conflicts but sometimes just, yeah, just taking that pause and just choosing how to react or not, or like not bickering with your partner or just saying, oh, well, you did this and da da da, and just escalating it all. But I suppose I've learned not to take everything so personally. Like before, everything would like hurt me, or I'd just kind of feel it, that kind of wounding. But I don't know, just with the practice and, the repetition, to not take everything so personally.
Well, I agree with you. I used to take everything so personally, but that's part of your inner child healing and those parts of us that are wounded becoming more integrated, right, into us as a whole. That, you can recognize that you're not 6 anymore in this moment. You're now a young adult woman, right? Or a young adult, or you're a woman, mature woman who's experiencing this, and experience it through a very different lens. But when we start to do this work, it feels like we're 6 years old or 8 years old at the time. And it's and we're trapped in that until we release that.
As you were talking, I just thought, well, just a little example. Like a couple of years back, I was running workshops and I went up to my husband and I was like really excited. I was like, oh, someone signed up for my workshop. And he was like looking in the cupboard and he was just talking about like, why do you keep opening these packets and not finishing them? And I just like burst into tears because it was that feeling of like, when you're really excited and you want to tell someone something and you're like dismissed and his mind was just somewhere completely, else. And I just like started crying. But I can see that obviously he was, doing something else and it wasn't that personal really. But yeah, it's that
But
kind
in
of
that
just
moment, you were probably that little girl who
yeah.
felt disappointed again, right? For not being recognized or not being validated of what's going on for you that's important to you. So that took you back in a flash. So
Yeah, and but also it's celebrating ourselves, I don't know, having that ability to like going, yes, like we did it. Like we wrote a book. Like how awesome is that? Like wanted to write this book for like 20 years. And it's kind of, yeah, just to really kind of celebrate yourselves. And I think sometimes we forget, we always, oh, we'll go on to the next thing. Oh, we'll just write the next book. But oh yeah, just kind of celebrating as we go as well, which is a great reminder to myself as I'm talking.
we always we always need our own medicine. There's no question. That's why we do what we do. Because we're never exonerated. So if you were to teach the novice anything from your own personal experience about your experience with ayahuasca, is there anything that surprised you about the journey or a piece of advice that you would impart with the listeners today that may be helpful for them?
I guess it was to kind of really prepare. I really, spent a lot of time in nature before thinking, why am I doing this?
Ah,
What's my intention? And it was interesting because when I signed up for the second time, I felt the medicine was working already. And I started letting go of some of my sort of lower paid work. And I kind of call it endurance work. And I think, when you're really used to enduring, and I was like, why am I still teaching these classes that pay me so much less than the other stuff that I do? And it's kind of the loyalty to the people that come to the class. And I don't know. And then I started just slowly letting go of things. And I thought, if you're going to write a second book, you need to create space in your life, because the first one was written squeezed into a really busy life. But this second time round, I've created space to, just for the work as well.
That's progress, right? You're evolving.
So I think it's, what calls you. For some reason, I was called to ayahuasca and not so much the, the psilocybin or, the kind of mushroom based route, which people have had great results from that as well. Maybe there was a part of me that's also scared what the mushrooms might bring up, because I think it can be quite somatic as well. So maybe there was that little bit of like, oh, what, I guess part of me still scared, like, what else do I have to release? Because the trauma that I experienced went on for a long time. So there's just a lot there.
I think that's normal to feel apprehension and fear around what else there is. I think that's one of the reasons why I don't. And I do believe that different people need different tools at different times. So this is a judgment-free zone in respect to what we're talking about. I'm neutral about it. I think that it can be great for some people, but I do think that there's preparation and assessment required to do this properly. That's the route I would do if I was ever going to go that route. I want to be someone who has some sort of medical background, someone who has a clinical background, who can assess mental health before I would even indulge in it, right? And I think that's sometimes missing, but it's there. It is there. I'm not a proponent for it or against it. I'm very neutral around it, but I do think that we need to be more inclusive about how people get well. Because if we start to judge people based on whether it's medication assistance, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's 12 step, whether it's neuroscience, we're just creating more separation, which creates more pain and is rewounding the very person that really wants to come back into integration with themselves and community. So I think it's really, really important that we are open-minded about the pathway people choose to get well and how they heal.
I completely agree with you. And I did take a psychedelic readiness kind of questionnaire,
Oh, good.
which had obviously lots of questions, but I did score quite highly on that, with so that I was actually very prepared. And I was also prepared for, thinking about, potentially I could have had like a really bad trip. And I've kind of looked at all the, the different things that could have happened as well.
So you're mindful and intentional, like you said about it, which is absolutely critical. Um, we need to be that way in our life more so anyway. So, but even more so at times where we're really giving up some aspect of control over ourselves.
And on the second place I went to, we also did like breath work on the Friday evening when we got there, and that that also kind of takes you into an altered state as well.
I agree.
So it's not, there are other ways to kind of access those different, levels of kind of consciousness, if you like.
I remember doing a breathwork class where it was completely different than I have ever experienced. And I did. I felt like I came out having a completely altered experience. It was intense. I wanted the experience. So I worked hard at that. Right? But so I went through it with like the earnestness of a student who wants an A plus. And it was an amazing experience for me. So I understand how that can help.
And also, Jeanne, it's the everyday habits which I think are more important in the sense of, your whatever, the meditation, if you do yoga, if you exercise, that you eat well, that you sleep enough, that you're hydrated. But I think it's these constant, all those little well-being habits, day in, day out, that are the kind of, the fundamentals of our sort of well-being. And when you let things slip and then you feel a bit, you start overthinking, or you feel a bit kind of crappy. But it is, I don't know, I have really realised that they're just so important, and they just have to be maintained.
Absolutely. And you know that we're a proponent of that. And that's really what holistic recovery is. It's all those things you talked about, which are fundamentals, and also fundamentals in many areas of our life. Where is there balance? Is the scale tipping too much? Like all of these areas need to be looked at so we can integrate as a whole. And that's what happens. We become fractured by the parts of us that are unhealed or broken or traumatized, depending on what we're talking about. And the journey is to integrate them back into the whole. So I want to thank you for lending your voice again. And you and me on the first one were one of the most downloaded episodes. So you have quite an audience as well. And people are interested. Next to relationships was you, and next to relationships, because relationships are the ultimate mystery of the universe for a lot of us. I could go on from about that one, that's for sure. Before I leave, I ask every guest who's on this show, how do you stay naturally high?
Definitely meditation, daily meditation, even if it's 5 minutes in the morning. And I do like a 5 minute, sometimes it's 10 minutes, but as a minimum, but ideally I like to kind of do 20 minutes. And I'm so strict with my bedtime. The kids have started going to bed later than me.
Oh,
I'm going to bed at 8:30 in the evening. I do start work quite early, so I am quite up early, but I just always want to make sure I get enough sleep. So definitely the sleep as well.
I'm a different animal without sleep. So I know that about me. Absolutely. So, but I'm not going to bed as early as you. So that's something to improve upon. There you go.
But I mean, obviously, whatever works for people. But I'm definitely making sure that you do get enough, but consistently enough as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniela, for being on Naturally High. I just love your wisdom. I love the fact that you're on the other side of the ocean and we still connect on a regular basis. And we still have so much in common, even though we're so different. So that's part of our common humanity. We're more alike than different. And I say that to people who are listening today. May they be people, may their common humanity be the drive that wants them to connect with one another rather than separate.
No, definitely. I totally agree. And I would love to invite you as a guest on my new podcast, which is called Post-Traumatic Wisdom. So I'd love you to be a guest with so you can share all your wisdom.
Thank you. I now may put it in a book. I keep talking about it, but each time I listen to you more and more and more, I am inspired. I go, oh my God, I do have a book in me. I just haven't really put it down on paper. So maybe it's time to do that. Because I think you probably would recognize this. And we find that there's the same lessons, not meaning your lessons are my lessons, but I mean that we say the same things over and over again in different ways. And that's the basis of a good sort of foundation or growth plan, that you are saying the same things, you are doing the same things. You haven't really deviated and making things up on the fly kind of thing. There's room for innovation. I'm not saying there's not, but we're definitely evolving. So yes, I'd love to be a guest on your podcast. So please.
And I can't wait to read your book as well.
Okay, well, now you're giving me something to do. I'm going to do that outline that you told me about. Okay, so until next time, everybody, stay naturally high. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you today, Daniela. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing about your new release in June on Post-Traumatic Stress Day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Naturally High. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or reach out to me through the links in the show notes. Together, we're changing the way the world approaches mental health, addiction, and trauma. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a rating for Naturally High on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. For more inspiration and resources, follow me on Instagram at therecovery_concierge or visit therecoveryconcierge.com. Stay empowered, keep rising, and I'll see you in the next episode.